Welcome to CARB's public meeting to discuss tentative research priorities being considered for fiscal year 2022-2023. To kick us off, the research program chief, Elizabeth Sheely, will provide some opening remarks.
Thanks, Sonia. And thanks everybody for joining. Just want to welcome everybody to this meeting. It's good to see that we have quite an audience today to talk about our research planning and tentative priorities for next fiscal year, 2022-2023. And this meeting really is to get public input on our research priorities that we're considering for next year. They've been informed by the concepts and comments that we collected earlier this year from the public. So I really want to thank all of you that were engaged in that process as well. It helped to shape where we are today. The priorities we'll present today have also been informed by our triennial research plan, which was also developed through a public process and approved by the board in March of this year. The triennial plan details our commitment to operationalize racial equity in our research, and this meeting is a part of that effort to really include more voices and be more transparent in our research planning process, and to solicit and incorporate public input earlier in the planning process before the research projects are fully developed. So now I'll hand it back over to Dr. Sonia Collier from the research division, and they will provide an overview of our research program, the annual planning process, and a summary of the public input we've received to date.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, I'm gonna go over today's agenda. We've already covered some of the introductions. For the next 15 minutes, we will give a brief overview of the CARB research program. And then starting around 4:20, we're going to start the topical discussions, and we'll spend about 20 minutes on each one. We'll start with mobile sources, and then air quality, and then climate, sustainable communities, and economics. And then for the last 40 minutes of the meeting, we'll cover health and environmental justice. So now we'll begin with the program overview. The legislature created the board's research program in 1971 to support CARB's goals by providing the scientific foundation for effective air pollution control. The research program encompasses all aspects of air pollution and plays an important role in meeting the challenges of increasingly stringent federal air quality standards and long-term climate goals. And it also serves as the foundation for effective regulatory decisions. Research program priorities are also responsive to emerging topics and aim to advance measuring and monitoring methods and improve health outcomes. Research projects and topics are identified based on both program needs, emerging issues, and public input. CARB develops program priorities into research projects that can be completed through in-house research, contracted research projects, which receive our research program funding each fiscal year, and through collaborative research efforts with other state and federal agencies and institutions. As stated earlier, the research program encompasses all aspects of air pollution and covers a wide variety of interrelated topic areas. The health research program focuses on how CARB can quantify and communicate health benefits for indoor and outdoor air. The environmental justice research program focuses on how CARB develops and tracks metrics to evaluate changes in health over time and at the community level. Under economics, an overarching concern is how do we equitably accelerate the transition to zero emissions? And in air quality, we ask, what are the priorities to understand pollutant exceedances and what mitigation strategies can be developed? And in support of CARB's climate program, our research aims to support carbon neutrality goals. And there's many more details on each of these program categories in the Triennial Strategic Research Plan. Every 3 years, we compile information on our past and current research projects and future research priorities into one document called the Triennial Strategic Research Plan. This plan is developed with public input. Last year, we hosted a public research roundtable to get feedback on our proposed research initiatives. The plan provides a roadmap for our research covering the next 3 fiscal years. It aids us in research planning and is a useful tool and reference. It's also essential in guiding our annual selection of research projects and in delineating CARB's new research priorities. One such priority is in identifying strategies to operationalize racial equity in CARB research. We have started implementing changes to the research program, including greater transparency in our project selection process, incorporating environmental justice focused projects and priorities, including community-based projects, and more projects that include community engagement earlier in the process. We are implementing scoring criteria for our proposals that encourages multidisciplinary teams and new partnerships. And Sarah Patiglio will be providing a link to the Triennial Strategic Research Plan in the chat for your reference. I'm going to now go over our research planning process. It begins each year by identifying research project concepts and comments through a public comment and concept solicitation. We also get input from CARB's staff, board members, and internal stakeholders. And in response to public input, we will be increasing community engagement at this stage. A final list of proposed projects is presented to the board for approval, and we provide updates to the board on specific projects at their request. After project approval, we release a solicitation for pre-proposals from the Universities of California and California State Universities. In order to increase the transparency of our solicitation award process and foster the development of multidisciplinary research teams, this year we held solicitation meetings and leveraged online forums such as Empower Innovation, which is created by the California Energy Commission. Proposals are reviewed and winning proposals selected and finalized. Once proposals are finalized, a subset of proposals are reviewed by the Research Screening Committee, which is composed of various subject matter experts independent of CARB. They review the proposals and provide their comments. Proposals are then developed into executed contracts. When appropriate, we establish project advisory committees to provide oversight and direction. The executive office provides final approval and these projects become active research. During that phase, online progress updates and outreach are done. Most projects, when finalized, are reviewed by the Research Screening Committee, and final results of all projects are disseminated to the public through seminars and online documents. For this fiscal year 22-23 planning process, we are at the very beginning of this whole process that I've described. So the very beginning of the planning process consists of collecting research comments and concepts from the public. This year we received 28 concepts. A majority of the concepts came from academic stakeholders, but also included stakeholders from government, policy, and industry. As you can see, we received concepts covering all of the topics we cover in our research program. And additionally, more than half of the submissions were from first-time submitters. I will now give a broad overview of the research concept topics we received. In health, we received research concepts related to non-tailpipe emissions and health effects of wildfire smoke. We also received project ideas related to our indoor exposure and related health effects. Under environmental justice, we received projects related to the equity factors of exposure to wildfire and agricultural emissions exposure, and on the exposure to toxics like heavy metals and to emission hotspots. In economics, we received concepts related to the market transformation pathways for supplying low carbon fuels. We also saw projects related to the program assessment of greenhouse gas reductions from natural and working lands, the effects of policy on prescribed fire and prevalence of wildfires, and on assessing emissions from off-road sources. We also received a concept on examining behavioral economics, specifically looking at testing messaging of different energy efficient labels. Under air quality, we saw multiple projects on wildfires and community monitoring. And under mobile sources, we saw project ideas related to the impacts of vehicle and fleet electrification, non-tailpipe emissions, and the performance of low carbon propulsion systems, as well as on measuring emissions from off-road equipment. Under climate, we received concepts on remote sensing method refinement, clean emissions from gasifiers, on conversion of bioresidues, and on reducing emissions from natural and working lands, including performing carbon life cycle assessments from different forest management practices. As part of our effort to be more transparent and to make the survey more accessible, we also received more open-ended comments and concerns. We received 6 comments, which included topics like pesticide exposure and support for American manufacturing and invention, particularly in the EV industry. We also saw various concerns surrounding heavy-duty vehicles, including emissions from various activities like parking and idling, illegal modifications, super high emitters, and anything related to that topic, potential of certification facilities allowing vehicle modifications to operate. There was also a concern regarding warehouse building permits that are implemented near low-income neighborhoods. We also received concerns regarding valley fever mitigation strategies and on air quality impacts of wood burning during winter months. The concepts and comments described are critical for beginning our research planning process. CARB staff also submit research concepts as part of this process. And all concepts, whether generated from the public or internally, are assessed by internal stakeholders using key considerations and guidelines. These include the ones listed on
using the considerations that Sonia mentioned on one of the previous slides. And at this point, I'd also like to introduce the branch chiefs and actually have them introduce themselves so that you can put a name to the face as they go through the different presentations. And I will have Bonnie introduce herself first.
Okay, whoops. Sorry, just going through the process of unmuting and trying to get the video going. So I am Bonnie Holmes-Jen, and I am the branch chief for Health and Exposure Assessment Branch. And in my branch, we have 3 sections focused on buildings and indoor exposures, also another section focused on air quality and health analysis and ecosystem analysis, and a 3rd section that is focused on climate and health analysis, and also handles library services. Thanks.
And Jorn?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for attending this meeting. Really look forward to a good discussion and a lot of input. So my name is Jorn Herner. I'm one of the 3 branch chiefs in the research division. I oversee our mobile source research, our greenhouse gas ambient monitoring research, and also the research planning effort. I've been with CARB for a good 17 years now, and have been in this position for the last decade.
Great. And Mike, if you could introduce yourself, and I believe Toshi will also be speaking. So if you could introduce himself, that would be great.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Fitzgibbon. I oversee 3 sections. One of them is related to fluorinated gas rule development, and the other one is related to implementation of those rules. And then I have another group that focuses on atmospheric processes research. And then I also have a specialty as far as agricultural research, specifically working with the dairy industry over the past 20 years or so. One of my key managers, Dr. Toshi Kuwayama, will be presenting the air quality related research later if he wants to introduce himself now.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name is Toshi Kuwayama, and I manage the atmospheric processes research section of the research division. And as Mike stated, my section is focused on conducting research to support the state implementation plan development and also agriculture.
Great, thanks everyone. I look forward to getting into the discussion areas. We'll spend a little bit of time, a couple of minutes sort of describing what the projects we've prioritized. And I do want to emphasize there's so many important things we could be doing research on. Just because it hasn't made the proposed list does not mean it's not very important to what we do. And in fact, we keep running lists. Sometimes we're already doing work in that area, but we also go back each year and look at the projects that are on the list and that have been submitted and keep those in mind. Just a few brief guidelines before we get into the discussion. Please state your name and affiliation and your area of expertise, and please limit your comments and questions to 3 minutes and limit it to the research focus and what we have in hand right now, which is really the research priorities for this coming year. There are a number of folks, quite a few folks online, so we want to give everybody as much of a chance as possible to make comments. And with that, I will turn it over to Jorn to go over the first topic.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I will talk a little bit about the proposed mobile source research on this slide. And for your information, the project in bold on these slides on the top are the ones that we're currently considering funding. And the ones below the line that are not in bold are projects that are still very important, but we haven't found the funding for it at this time. So the project that we're currently considering funding comes after many, many years of doing a lot of different work. The title of the project is How Much PM is Emitted from Brake and Tire Wear and What Factors Increase or Decrease Those Emissions. So we have obviously measured emissions and tailpipes for years and years and decades. And we've done such a good job of lowering those emissions with all the various regulations that we have, that the majority of directly emitted particulate matter from motor vehicles no longer come from the tailpipe. They come from other sources that are related to vehicles, specifically, and these include both tire and brake wear. In the last 4 to 5 years, we've done quite a bit of work on understanding brake wear. And we've done a lot of testing on brake wear. And we actually just updated our inventory based on that research that was done over the last 5 years. So this project, it says brake and tire wear, but it's really focused mostly on the tire wear, which is something that we haven't studied in as much detail yet. And in this particular project, we really want to measure brake and tire wear while the vehicle is actually driving on the road. So then going below the line, the next project that is important to us, but not currently making the cut for funding, is opportunities to further understand emissions from various off-road sectors, such as ocean-going vessels, locomotives, and other non-road sectors. Again, because the mobile sources on-road sector, the emissions are becoming so low that understanding these other sources of emission is becoming more and more important. And you know, you can take a truck and you can put it in a laboratory and drive it on the dyno and measure what comes out the tailpipe. But a lot of these sources are so large that you really can't do that. You can't take a cruise ship and put it on a dyno and measure the emissions, obviously. But there are now new sensors coming out that you can put in the exhaust pipe that might allow you to make some of these measurements. So that's one of the project. And then the next one are researching new, more efficient vehicle air conditioning systems. And the impetus for this is really that air conditioning has a huge effect on range for electric vehicles. In gasoline-powered vehicles, you have this huge gas tank, you have lots of energy. It doesn't really affect the overall mileage that much. But in electric vehicles, you're still using the same nominal amount of energy, but now it's a much larger portion of the overall energy use of the vehicle. And so in order for motor vehicle air conditioning not to affect EV range as much as it currently does, we need newer and better air conditioning systems. And so this study would take a look at other things that are available, like heat pumps and other things, and see if they would work in a passenger car. And I'll pause there for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Jordan. So now we're going to open up the discussion. We have about 15 minutes before we have to move on to the next topic. And you may use the raised hand function, or you can also drop questions into the chat. We have CARB staff monitoring that chat. So this is a good time to give us feedback on the projects that we are proposing to take to the board.
I don't think that the Zoom is currently configured to have a raised hand option.
Okay. I do see a raised hand. I do see a couple raised hands though. I don't know if anyone else has tips on where to find the raised hand, but right now I see a raised hand from Richard Stanowski. And then next after that will be Jesse Marquez.
It's under reactions. If you have the installed Zoom under reactions, there is a raise hand option.
Thank you.
Hi, Richard Stanowski, Homefront Environmental Justice, Morro Bay. One of the things that you triggered about the tire wear and brake wear along the highways and byways, our town of Morro Bay is basically bisected by the Scenic Highway 1. One of the other things that we have a project going measuring carbon dioxide around the estuary, but using also monitors to monitor other gases. Regarding the particulate matter, there's also another cross pollination going on with microplastics. They're finding it in the rain, they're finding it in the air. So that might be another reason why having these little sources where you can cross-pollinate that information coming from the highways, also helping people studying ocean acidification. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. It sounds like that would be a good thing to make sure that we analyze for when we collect the particulate matter.
Great. Next hand I see up is Jesse Marquez.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Jesse Marquez. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for a Safe Environment. We're an environmental justice organization in Wilmington, California, where the Port of Los Angeles is our neighbor, as well as the Port of Long Beach. Now, what I see right now, what you're showing on the slide, are basically only 3 proposals for the mobile sources. And what I would like to know, were there others submitted that are not being shown that we might want to select those or one of those over any one of the 3 that you have up there? So that's one question. And then in terms of brake and tire wear, if you're talking about, hooking up a little PM monitor underneath the tire or above the tire, something like that, we're not talking rocket science here. Anytime you go get a flat tire, or you're going to buy a new tire, or you purchase a tire insurance policy from like American Tire Company, they measure the tread of the tire. And if you're having brakes done, they measure the thickness of the brake pad or the brake plate itself. And so if you measure the difference, then the only way it disappeared is it was ground and pulverized. So, there's the answer, you grind it down to a certain point, well, what is that particle size? And so we're not talking about spending zillions of dollars on something that's a fairly easy thing that can be determined. If we're talking about, understanding emissions, then I think those of us that are promoting zero emission technologies, then I would prefer the monies to go into researching what are the zero emission technologies that are available. Our organization since 2017 periodically publishes a zero emissions vehicles, construction equipment, and other categories where we list every manufacturer, model number, serial number, series, or category of something that's available. So for example, if we're talking about, you talk to any port and port officials, they'll tell you that, well, there are no class 8 drayage trucks that meet our needs. Well, what they're referring to is whether or not the truck can go long distance, 300 miles, 500 miles, etc. Well, in that particular case, it is sort of true, although there are 3 trucks under demonstration right now that by the end of next year should have accomplished that. But in the meantime, in order to stop the misinformation and the lies going to the public and to elected and appointed officials, is that over 50% of all trips out of the Port of Bay and Port of Long Beach are local, less than 200 miles, and actually in the majority, 90% are less than 50 miles. So there are 18 Class 8 drayage trucks right now that you can order today that can be delivered within 12 months that would meet all the short haul needs and requirements. That is the study you need to show that that is what's available. And all it takes is for CARB or AQMD or whoever to create a policy or criteria or category where a truck can be approved for short hauls. Therefore, we get zero emissions operating, working, and included in the transition now, because they're available today now. And in our survey, I list, about 50 different categories of, in fact, we even started including ships.
10 seconds
I can even
left.
tell you the ships,
Thank you. And I'll reply to the first part. Sonia covered the comments and concepts that came in. So those you can refer back to see if there were some areas under mobile sources. After we've looked at those and looked at the considerations and the timelines and how this feeds into our policies and things like that, all those considerations that were listed out, these were the ones that we've prioritized from those lists and from what's come in from the public and internally. And Jorn, and really appreciate the comments. And Jorn, if you had anything to add on the tire and brake wear comments.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you also for the comment. I mean, a big part of this research will be not just quantifying what the emissions are. Like you said, you could do that kind of top down from measuring how many tires are we using, but it is what type of driving results in more emissions, and might you be able to tell folks to drive in a different way to reduce the emissions? What is the effect of the weight of the car on these types of emissions as we move to electric vehicles and they become heavier? Will there be more tire wear? Are there combinations of tire materials and roadways that increase or decrease this type of emission? So there are still a number of research questions that this will answer.
Yeah, but it goes beyond that. For example, the public approved $1 billion to be spent for the Alameda corridor in order to take the trucks off the freeways and highways and roads. And what has happened now, 20 years later? It's being used at about 30 to 35% capacity because it's not mandatory to use it. So no one wants to use it, and the ports don't include it as any mandatory requirement, and ACTA gets away with never increasing that service amount. So if you have programs and projects that take the trucks off the freeways and highways, then that is one of the research that needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you for that comment.
Thank you. The next person in line is Levi Tilleman.
Yeah, hi, thanks for calling on me. So I'm Levi Tilleman. I lead policy for Ample. We are a company that focuses on battery swapping. So battery swapping is a means to refuel EVs quickly in about 5 minutes. Ample's system does this at a cost that is about 15% cheaper than the price of gasoline. I think there are a couple of policy research areas that are sort of staring CARB in the face, and it would make a lot of sense to spend some time on. One of those is the penalties associated with relying on public charging infrastructure for people who don't have access to home charging. The majority of Americans don't have access to home charging for their electric vehicles. I don't have access to home charging for my electric vehicle. And it's very costly in terms of both time and money to rely on much of the infrastructure that CARB and CEC are currently working to deploy. So just to give you an example, if an Uber driver has to charge their vehicle for an hour every day, which is actually quite conservative, and they want to drive an EV, that's going to cost them the equivalent of $5,000 in annual income. Public charging costs about $8 a gallon equivalent currently. And so that is going to be an additional $4,000 penalty over the price of gasoline if you assume a 40 mile per gallon ICE vehicle. So if someone wants to switch over from an ICE vehicle to an electric vehicle and they're a high utilization driver, that's going to be about a $9,000 penalty for someone who only makes about $40,000 a year. So I think looking into things like that, what are the real world consequences of public infrastructure and how do they affect the lives of people who can't charge their vehicles at home? Another place that I think it would make a lot of sense to spend some time is on the costs of grid integration for fast charging and especially ultra high power fast charging. BCG published a study in 2018 that estimated that the per vehicle cost for grid upgrades for electrification would be between $1,700 and $5,800. Now, the really troubling part about that number is that as the penetration of electric vehicles increases, the cost of those grid upgrades will also increase because of the demand that those vehicles and those high power chargers will place on the grid.
You have 30 seconds, Levi.
Yep. So I think some areas like that would make a lot of sense to look into. Alternative technology pathways, such as battery swapping, can solve a lot of those problems. And I think that these are the real world issues that affect delivery drivers, Uber drivers, and anyone who doesn't have access to that affluent suburbanite lifestyle that characterizes most of the Tesla owners, who are the majority of EV owners in California today.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, and certainly folks around the agency who are thinking of those things. But great ideas and good comments. I encourage you to get on our listserv and during the next solicitation to also submit some ideas along those lines so they get into the pipeline for what's considered.
We're reaching the end of the time we allocated for this specific topic. I'll allow one more comment and then we're gonna have to move on to the next one. The next person in line is Leonard Seitz.
Yes, I submitted some comments today and also previously having to do with the denominator in emission rates, hot stabilized emission rates that are speed adjusted. I won't dwell on that, but one of the points that I make that I think is fairly critical is that the emission rate for an idling vehicle in grams per mile is necessarily infinite and produces an asymptote to the speed equals zero axis. My suggestion is to change the units in the emission rates to grams per hour rather than grams per mile. That avoids that problem, also ties it much more closely to people's behavior and to transportation modeling. So I'll stop at that unless there are questions someone wants to answer. wants me to answer.
Thank you. Maybe we'll take just one more comment from Miss Margaret.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, my question is, can you put on in the chat the background or the documentation of the selection of the topics for research? And where is citizen science being included in the identifying the research topics? Can I have that in the chat?
Yes, we can provide the criteria that we use to select projects. And Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to jump in on the
I'll jump in.
community-based science.
So there is a link, and we can provide another link to the triennial plan as well, which kind of gives an overview of the research that we do for the agency. So the research we're talking about here covers quite a breadth of different topics, from, like, right now we're on the mobile sources, and it's as I mentioned earlier, it's a fairly limited budget. We have about $4 million for the entire agency, so it has to cover all of our research needs, from mobile sources, stationary sources, health, environmental justice, and we are trying to incorporate, and that's part of what we discussed in the triennial research plan, incorporate and operationalize racial equity in our research. And as part of that, looking to incorporate and consider more EJ components and community-based type projects as well. So that's where, and we will be discussing some of those later, I believe, in the EJ section.
But Elizabeth, I asked, my ask was, please put the information in the chat.
Yes, we will do that.
Okay, we are constrained by time, so we're going to actually move on to the next topic, which is the research we are proposing on air quality.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Toshi, we can hear you.
All right, thanks, Anya. So I'll go ahead and give a brief background of the recent air quality research at CARB and how that connects to these proposed air quality research. So CARB has an obligation under the Clean Air Act to comply with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS, for 6 criteria air pollutants, which include PM 2.5 and ozone. And they can affect visibility or ecosystems, and being exposed to them can cause adverse health effects. So the challenge is controlling these air pollutants because of how emissions can interact with our atmosphere or in our atmosphere, and that really affects how much and how PM 2.5 and ozone can form. Climate and meteorology can also affect air quality, which really emphasizes the need to conduct a well thought out research to effectively solve California's complex air quality problems. Places like the San Joaquin Valley, for instance, and South Coast have been ranked one of the worst air quality regions in the nation. And we're still working towards attaining the PM 2.5 and ozone standards, primarily through emission reduction strategy that focuses on controlling NOx or oxides of nitrogen from the mobile sector specifically. But really, PM 2.5 and ozone can be rooted from a variety of air pollutant sources like off-road engines, things like consumer products, like cleaning agents, gases emitted from vegetation, agricultural operations, manufacturing plants, industry. There's a lot that can contribute to PM 2.5 and ozone air quality. So our recent air quality research has really focused on informing the 2022 SIP, or State Implementation Plan, development, particularly for ozone. And this was specifically to evaluate the current state of atmospheric chemistry that have been changed over the years as emissions are reduced more and more, which in turn changes what's in the air and the reactivity of. And in response to climate change, that is really making our air warmer, which again in turn affects how pollution's formed in our air. So it's kind of like our cell phone, right? Our cell phone devices have changed quite a bit just over the past 10 years, and when you actually look at different air pollutant sources, so have they, and we really need to be paying attention to all of these. So this year's air quality research focuses on the sources, the composition, and the chemistry of PM, which builds on and is synergistic to our past air quality research, particularly for ozone, so that we can be better prepared to reduce both PM 2.5 and ozone simultaneously as effectively as possible and to avoid unintended consequences from each other's objectives. We're also focused on understanding the effects of fire-related emissions on air quality and health, not just the direct smoke, but also the residual influence of emissions on air quality that can, depending on the region, linger on for days. The magnitude of fire emissions and its frequency has really increased significantly over the years, and we realize that these emissions will continue to affect our air quality as climate warming continues to affect the balance of our environment. So additional data on fuel types, including wildfire urban interface, emission factors, its emissions, transport, chemistry, and health is really needed to better inform future mitigation efforts of wildfires and other fire-related events and our natural working plan discussions. So there's a lot that needs to be done to inform all of our internal programs as well as external coordination. So there are other research questions that are driving our internal discussions and research planning process as we sort of communicate with others as well. And these include the influence of wildfire emissions on urban environment, wildfire mitigation through prescribed fires and their air quality offsets, air pollution transport from cross-border sources, and drying land and source of nitrogen that affects our air quality in our ecosystems. And with that, I'd like to open it to questions.
Thank you so much, Toshi. So for anyone who has a question, please use the raised hand function, and I'll allow people to speak in the order that I see the hands. Jesse, you have 3 minutes. Oh, you're still on mute, Jesse.
Okay, yeah, I just unmuted. Okay, sorry. One of the concerns that we have that all the ports, especially the Port of LA and Port of Long Beach, are in denial, and they refuse, even though we've identified them in public comments, that there are numerous off-port site service companies that service the ports. In the case of Wilmington, there are over 120 container storage yards. Now, these are included as CEQA. They are an indirect source. They do come from the port. And what happens is that when they do their assessments, transportation, inventory of emissions, congestion, et cetera, they never include all these sites that these trucks have to go to. So before a truck can even get to the port, it must pick up an empty chassis. And so you have the chassis that have to be picked up. There's no inventory on that. When the containers are empty, then trucks have to bring the empty containers somewhere, and they come to Wilmington, Carson, and West Long Beach, where they're stored and sometimes never leave. Now, when you have 120 container storage like yards in Wilmington, we're not talking a few, we're talking a lot. And we're talking about trucks going in and out of it every single day, 365 days a year. So if you're going to do a study, then do an air quality study of these types, because now we have container storage yards, there's chassis storage yards, there's truck storage yards, there's even true genset storage yards. And many of these storage yards are also repair and installation yards. So they're doing other activities besides just storing. So that would be one of the environmental justice priorities for us. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Appreciate it.
Do we have any questions or comments on the air quality project concepts that are on the slide? I see Richard Stanowski. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I just like to follow up with what Mr. Marquez says, because these are the areas that we need to have a contrast, a comparable data where we could get localized, maybe citizen scientist programs in these areas to do this through a grant program, and then contrast that with like marine protected areas on the coast where we could contrast that data and have something to bounce back. That's, those are the kind of emerging issues that I think we need to be addressing at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also wanted to point out, I believe the community air grants are another option as well, and another place to look for that sort of information and grant.
Vanessa Forsyth, you're next. You have 3 minutes. Vanessa, I cannot hear you if you're speaking.
Okay. Hi, can you?
Yes, I can hear you now. Oh, I lost you again. I heard you for a second and then I lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. In terms of, these projects, does it include addressing what policies should happen as a result of these projects? I mean, I kind of followed like what was first said about the breaks and measuring that, and I'm like, well, yeah, so what's going to happen if they do that research? What results will that produce in terms of policy? Is that included?
Great question, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so we definitely consider whether it's relevant for our programs and policy, and how can that feed into those programs. For example, understanding the chemistry and what sources are contributed in South Coast can help understand where you might want to mitigate, and understanding the health impacts from fires, for example, can help us, especially as they're moving into new environments, can help us figure out what's going on there. And we've done research on kind of doing research on prescribed fires versus wildfires and the impacts of that. So it's all, we do try to do research that gives us results that can feed in and really provide the basis for our policies and programs. Some are more direct, some provide just a scientific basis and foundation that's helpful in the very long run. So.
Well, just to say, there's so many emerging concerns in terms of air quality, and I think we really need to focus on the practical that gives results that, comparative and measurable, and then, what's the impact in terms of health? So with that, what's the recommendation for policy to mitigate? So that's just, in listening, I'm not a scientist. I'm a healthcare provider with Climate Health Now, and that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we definitely do research that feeds into our policies and programs. And some of the tire and brake wear work can also feed into the effectiveness of different types of vehicles, regenerative braking, and things like that, which help inform the programs as well.
Yeah, it's just like the hauling, and as the gentleman was talking about Wilmington, I mean, that is a big priority in terms of environmental justice too, where people live near these areas where all this hauling is happening, and the emissions, are excessive in that area compared to others. So those are, again, I think they've raised good points. So I just want to reiterate that. Thank you.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left on this topic, so I want folks to be mindful of that. I'll take one more comment from Andrew Mutziker.
With the Air Pollution Control District at San Luis Obispo. And this is
your volume's a little bit low. I don't wonder if you can adjust your microphone.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Andy Mutziger with the Air Pollution Control District in San Luis Obispo. And just a general question. If a couple of questions. If a good proposal's initial partner list includes a university but not a UC, what are the chances for funding? And then secondly, if that proposal loops in a UC, how will that be considered by CARB, and how quickly does that need to happen?
they're kind of past due.
Thank you for that question. I can answer that. I can help answer that question. Once we release our pre-proposal solicitation, we do require that the principal investigator be from a UC or a CSU, but we do encourage partnerships between universities and non-UC CSU partners. They can be from other universities or community-based organizations, or any research institution or organization that can partner with a UC or CSU. So that is why last year we hosted the solicitation on Empower Innovation as a forum for people to find partnerships, but we also encourage people to, look at what our research priorities are and start finding those partnerships now if they're interested in participating in our research program. But we do have to look for talent in the UCs and CSUs first. If we can't find a researcher that can fulfill our research needs, then we do go through a RFP proposal, but that's not super common. I don't know if anyone else from CARB would like to fill in any other gaps I didn't cover. If not, it looks like we have 3 minutes left, so I'll allow Bascom Grecian to ask your question. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, I'm Bascom Grecian. I represent the petroleum industry in Northern California. We have been through some really bad fires in this area. Some of the air index qualities during the last 2 months have been over 500, very unhealthy air quality. My question, comment would be if the forests were properly maintained, if the severity of the smoke would have been a lot less. There was a lot of days where they just couldn't do the firefighting that they wanted to do by the air because there was like zero visibility, probably down to a quarter mile at times, very unhealthy air quality. So if the forests in the state of California are better maintained and the fuels for the fires can be eliminated in the lower forests, it would have been a lot less severe. So my question would be, how can the state of California continue to charge a smog fee on vehicles when the efforts that those smog fees go toward for the last several years were just mitigated by all the smoke? Like, in other words, we should all get a reprieve from smog fees for the next couple of years.
Air pollution reduction is important for health impacts everywhere across the entire state of California. And there is work going on across all of the agencies on wildfire prevention.
Well, I haven't seen much, I'm in Northern California and, I'm at the top of the Sacramento Valley, and, really the fuels were, the lower forest fuels were kind of taken out on some of the, highways where there's one way in, one way out, but across all of the state land, we've really got to develop a plan in place to get the undergrowth out of the forest, because that's what makes the forests burn so rapidly. And so that really should be the focus.
There's work going on at other agencies as well that are in charge of managing forests. There's a lot of research and other work going on right now.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so we are right on time to move on to the next portion of our discussion, our next topic. So now we're going to be discussing sustainable communities, sorry about that, economics and climate research.
Yeah, hi everyone, this is Jorn again, and this is very apropos. So obviously, as an agency, we want to communicate some of the things that we're learning about the effects of air quality and how to avoid exposures and things like that. And in particular, more recently with all these fires, it is becoming critical that we find effective ways of communicating what exposures are and what they might cause. And also now we're going to have some of these clean air shelters available during fires. And so with this first project, what we really want to understand is what is the best way to communicate these types of things to the public, so that people can take the right actions to protect their health and be able to breathe clean air during these terrible fires that we're all having. Switching gears a little bit, I mean, this is a climate sustainable communities and economics are they're desperate categories. So switching gears a little bit, we've long understood that transportation is changing in the state, and it used to be that you always drove a car when you went from point A to point B in California, and that is now less the case than it has been before. So we've started doing research around strategies to reduce VMT and the associated greenhouse gas emissions, research around how do you evaluate our progress on 375. Also research on effects of local investments in infrastructure, the built environment, and transportation systems, public transportation on displacement and things of that nature. So now the next step here, the next logical step within that area is, how does lack of affordable housing in California combined with environmental and economic burden impact the combined housing and transportation costs for Californians. And I'll pause there for questions.
I see a hand by Steve Rosenblum. You have 3 minutes. Steve, you're still muted. If you unmute yourself and test the line.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. I think most people understand that good air quality is really important to their health. We all know when there's smog or particulates, it's hard to breathe. I'm not sure what you need to communicate about the benefits of clean air. I think we all understand that. So could you please elaborate on that? What is it that you're going to do besides having shelters?
Yeah, so get information out so people know that the shelters are there, that they can, so that can avail themselves of that resource. I want to make sure that folks are informed of when they're going up, where they are, how they work, and things around that. There's also a lot of questions of, what are the health effects of breathing very bad air for short periods of time, and how do you communicate what are the effects of these short-term exposures in a way that's meaningful to folks so that they can make decisions about their daily activities and the effect of their health.
I see a question by Leonard Seitz. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, I'd like to take another whack at VMT as a measure of travel. And in particular, when you've got low speed travel, grams per vehicle mile go very high. There's a tendency to ignore it. I've seen cases where we talked about people stuck in traffic, but there's no emissions because there's no vehicle miles. Everybody's not moving. That's just another argument to look at travel hours as the measure of what causes pollution, and it's also what people pay attention to. There's another concept related to that, and that is a travel time budget. And that the people will tend to travel approximately the same amount of time per day, whereas the distance is highly dependent on how fast they go. So that's certainly far too much to get into at this time and place, but hopefully there'll be some attention paid to the comments I submitted for this meeting, and we can go into it further.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. Certainly there are speed correction curves and things like that for local transportation modeling. But thank you for the comment.
Are there any additional questions on climate, sustainable communities, and economic research that being proposed for next year? I see Jesse Marquez. You have 3 minutes.
Oh, Jesus. Okay, well, when we're talking about communicating air quality benefits, and we're talking about, the public, then it needs to be broken down into a few simple categories. What can member of the public do at home, in their home environment? So we're talking about, stoves and ovens and heaters and things of that nature. And then we're talking about, what their choices are in terms of public transportation, and whether it's their personal car or selecting or requesting to use a zero emissions bus or taxi or Uber or Lyft type vehicle. And then the other reality is that, really being fair to the public in terms of what is being available. Like I mentioned earlier, there are 18 Class 8 drayage trucks that can be used for short hauls. Well, the public has a right to know that they can go attend a port public meeting and a South Coast HMD meeting, a CARB meeting, and say that, yes, we need there to be 2 types of certifications or validations or approvals so that we can utilize what's available now, which there are 18 trucks for short hauls versus the long ones, which might be another year or 2 out into the picture, but then also be truthful about the cost. Yes, it costs more for a zero emissions battery or hydrogen fuel cell truck, but those prices will drop down. So just like you prepare all your charts and graphs, show one that'll show the price dropping so that we see there is a future there. But at the same time, let's also use some of the manufacturer's data. There are some of these trucks that do provide data that show that, well, right now diesel fuel says approximately $4 per gallon. Well, the equivalent in electric is about $1 or less per electricity per gallon. So the public needs to know these type of things. Also, that there'll be less maintenance and repair on an electric truck versus a diesel truck. So there's substantial savings there. So that over the lifetime of a truck, it is more profitable to have a zero emissions vehicle versus a non-zero emission vehicle. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. There's definitely a lot of good things that we can communicate, and hopefully this research will help us find out how best to do that.
Next, I see Richard Stanowski, and you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, Richard Stanowski, Homefront, EJ, Morro Bay. Regarding climate research and sustainable communities, I think that we have a huge amount of data gaps. And one of the issues with CARB's population-based air monitoring policies, they're lacking in what we need to study in the future for California to become carbon neutral, if that's the goal, which it is. Anyway, what I think that we need to maybe have a standard for low-cost air monitoring devices. Also, maybe make special consideration or a special criteria for carbon dioxide, since that atmospheric carbon dioxide is going up significantly, has gone up in the last couple of years. Anyway, I think that would be help with the research and make those kind of funds available. And one of the things about the beauty of, if you want to educate people, when you give them like on-the-job training, give them jobs that actually you do the training in the field. And these kind of programs can really fill in the data gaps and then create climate change jobs. Thank you.
Appreciate the comment, and some of those may be outside, and some of the comments I'm hearing today may be outside of our realm of what we can do for the research program. Some of those we can pass along to other programs as well. Just want to make sure that we're retaining the focus on what we're trying to talk about here, which is the research projects in front of us, and the ones that we're looking to prioritize for the coming year. And some of this feedback is really very useful, not only for this year, but also feeding into the process for next year as well. I know we have a few other hands raised.
Miss Margaret, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, on the topic of climate sustainability, community, and economic research, the missing piece here is all these things all connected back to race. Who is the most vulnerable? Who is the most impacted is the Black and brown people who live in the urban areas, who live in semi-urban areas, agriculture areas, and those who live in agriculture areas are most burdened of not having good affordable housing, good environmental protections just from the local government. And the local government does not provide those services that support the economic disproportionate impacts for not having a job, not having resources, not having the tools for those things. So the missing language here is where is the Black and brown being advanced when you look at climate change and sustainability, communities, and in economic research. Furthermore, where are the Black and brown researchers that come from our communities, who know about our communities, are being part of the process, not part of the problem, but part of the process to give that sustainability to such communities. And I'm gonna reflect on another thing. I live in Oakland. How Oakland started in late 90s, reducing the public housing units throughout from West Oakland to East Oakland. And when they start reducing that density and taking some of the land to revitalize those housing projects, they put in more home ownership and more home ownerships for those who did not live in those housing projects. So this issue about affordability and not income-based housing, and looking at how the state of California, local government, and the federal government have participated in looking at these, not really being mindful and very careful about what it takes to propose the climate justice, sustainability justice in our communities and with the economic research. We are closing schools in Oakland, California. So how is that? Where do those people go? Where is those kids going? So this is a combined problem solving needed, is starting not just talking about equity, but also talking about race.
Thank you. Elizabeth, do you want to respond?
Appreciate those comments. And, I think we have a few areas where we're trying to incorporate equity really throughout all of the projects, and looking to also create partnerships with communities in the projects where there are community aspects to it. So really get those community voices and the lived experience into the research and considered in the research. I believe there's a few slides at the end where we talk about our plans on that side as well, and how we're moving forward to operationalize racial equity. And there have been some projects to look at some of the historical impacts of things like redlining as well. Really appreciate those comments. I think it's important for us to consider equity and consider how the research impacts people on the ground as we move forward throughout all the projects.
But you don't have there's nothing in none of these proposed topics that you talked about race. Now, who is most vulnerable, most impacted, even by geographics?
Yeah, and some have it incorporated within the kind of like, we're looking at the demographics and the racial components within the project, or would be if we move forward with it, as well as things like the clean air shelters are focused on providing those shelters in disadvantaged communities. And as we get into some of the health and environmental justice topics, which I believe are the next topics, you may see some of that more clearly through in those.
But they haven't even come out your mouth. I'm talking about race and you still haven't even supported one word to me that you understood what I said about race being part of this particular topic.
No, race is a part of the conversation. It's a part of the research that we're looking at and the way that we look at it, as well as disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, but it should have been here. It's not there. The word race is not even in the sentence. It's not even in the sentence.
I appreciate that feedback.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes left on this topic. Kathleen Ave, I'm going to let you have the last comment in this section.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate the forum. Kathleen Ave from the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. I guess my concern with the item that is currently below the line is that I feel like we have ample evidence already that there are huge housing and transportation cost burdens that exist because of the lack of affordable housing near job centers and urban centers. And I feel like the criteria for undertaking research in this area should be how quickly does it result in more units on the ground. There needs to be a higher bar for research in areas where we already know a fair amount in terms of how quickly does it translate into more housing for communities that is very affordable. And then my additional comment, and I apologize if this would be more appropriate in the health section, but last week I attended the CHIRP work group meeting, and I just wanted to express my hope that some research dollars could be put towards a more proactive, investigating a more proactive approach that would allow for investment in impacted communities before additional events, additional extreme events that create additional pollution. The program that was proposed, and I absolutely appreciate the very forward-looking attempt to deal with what we know is coming, more extreme heat events and more additional generation that could be dirtier than we want it to be. But I think it's still very reactionary in that it waits for those events to happen and then allocates funding. So I feel like somewhere between all of the good research that's done at the CEC and the projections of what we're expecting, that could be made more proactive. And if that requires an additional research effort, then I think that's worth it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that comment.
Okay, we are going to move on to the health section. And Bonnie will take over the next few slides.
Great. And good afternoon again. And I'm really happy to be part of this discussion. It's been an excellent discussion so far. And again, Bonnie Holmes-Jen, Chief of the Health and Exposure Assessment branch, and we cover health projects and health contracts, and we have a big role in analyzing the health impacts and the health benefits of our rules, regulations, and programs at the agency. So we have a long history at the ARB of air quality and health research, including epidemiological studies on human populations and mechanistic studies to better understand the health impacts of criteria air pollutants, both individually and combinations of pollutants. And we have had an emphasis on looking at disparities in air pollution exposures, especially in under-resourced communities. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in this section and in the next section on environmental justice. I know there was a comment, we need to be talking about who are the most impacted and who are the most burdened. And we are very, very interested in continuing to put more emphasis in understanding and prioritizing under-resourced communities and the health effects and the increased vulnerabilities experienced in those communities.
Oh, you're kidding. It's so warm outside.
Oh. And so I just want to quickly mention a couple of things before I talk about some of these proposals that are on the list. I just wanted to harken back to one of the more well-known and impactful health studies, just the Children's Health Study that I know many of you have heard of and have been impacted by, which was a really important 10-year study looking at children in the Los Angeles region and provided such valuable information about pollution impacts on lung development in children and induction of asthma, among other health outcomes. And CARB is continuing to build on this important history and looking at ways that we can increase our understanding of health effects. Currently, we have an important project that's building on some prior research, but also looking at new research that's coming online this year and in the next year. And we kind of have it in the basket of expanding health analysis. This is our expanding health analysis project that is in our research plan. And it's focused on developing a more comprehensive understanding of the range of illnesses and outcomes that are linked to air pollution, including both those that we can quantify and those that are difficult to quantify. And we plan to use the new data that we're developing and the new information we're developing in our regulatory analysis going forward.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So as part of that project, we're currently finalizing plans right now for a study. And I'm just giving you this as helpful background as I talk about these projects. We're finalizing plans to quantify the health effects of certain types of brain health outcomes linked to air pollution, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and birth outcomes linked to pollution, both fine particulates and possibly toxic pollutants and other types of criteria pollutants. We are asking the researchers to the extent that they can to disaggregate results by race and ethnicity. We want to understand the impacts on different parts of our community. So as you can see, we have another proposal concept on the list here moving forward to look at additional health outcomes linked to air pollution exposure, looking at additional brain health issues. In this proposal, we're talking about potentially learning disabilities and also metabolic effects linked to air pollution, including diabetes, which is a main metabolic effect, but also could include other metabolic effects, potentially including some cardiovascular effects. Just looking at some of the other health projects and concepts that we have on the list here. We have a lot of focus. I know we've already talked about wildfire as a key air pollution and health concern. We have an ongoing project looking at short-term smoke waves, trying to better understand the health impacts from these days to weeks of smoke that people are exposed to because of the ongoing wildfires, unfortunately, connected to climate change. As we look forward, we have some items on the list here related to better understanding wildfire health impacts, including looking at toxic pollutants, particularly from structural fires, looking at maternal and infant health effects, other kinds of sensitive populations, and looking more carefully at some of those effects. We're very interested in building our information base, both so that we have more understanding of health effects, and as was stated earlier, so we can better communicate those health effects, so that we can better advise people how to protect themselves during those short-term smoke events that are becoming more common. I wanted to note that in most of these proposals, I would maybe say all, as we're going forward, we're working hard to incorporate community outreach components where we can into our health research. Just for example, in the wildfire smoke wave project, this is a current project that's being finalized. I mentioned we are going to have a community outreach component and be working with community organizations to gather input and share information on the health outcomes we're studying, and get their input on the project as we go forward. There's a few other projects that are on the list. In addition to our expanding health analysis, we're very interested in supporting the agency's work, of course, on building decarbonization. And building decarbonization, of course, is a key priority as we move forward. It's an important part of our plans for reducing emissions that contribute to climate change and improving health. And in this project, we hope to better characterize emissions from combustion in commercial buildings, analyzing emission factors related to commercial buildings, and how emissions vented from commercial buildings contribute to outdoor pollution and health, and investigating exposures to indoor pollutants from these environments. And this is reflecting that we have a fairly good base of information on combustion emissions in residential, but not as much information on the commercial sector. We've talked about climate and heat, I think, previously. That's another concept that we're looking at closely, and understanding more about how the health, what are the health benefits of heat, extreme heat mitigation strategies. We feel like we have a lot of research, a large knowledge base regarding extreme heat and health effects. And we know these are very serious effects, and they are felt across the state. But again, there are likely disparities in how these effects are felt in different communities. We want to look at the mitigation strategies and better understanding the benefits, and whether those benefits are spread equally, or if there's also, if there are disparities in those heat mitigation strategies that are being implemented, and how we can correct that. I think I've gone through a lot of things on the list here. Let's see, toxics is another key area, air toxics, and better understanding health effects of air toxics. And that's a key question that we've listed here. Both, we mentioned it in terms of wildfire smoke, but we're also, and I guess this is actually in the environmental justice, I'm getting ahead of myself. In the environmental justice frame, we also have some work that we're proposing that we'll discuss to better understand emissions that are being overlooked, and also to involve communities in looking at research gaps regarding air toxics. So some of that we'll talk in the next slide. All right, I think I'll leave it at that, unless okay, air cleaners. I do want to mention another key area, as we've talked about wildfires and health effects from wildfires. We, of course, want to help people protect their health. And we're trying to help people protect lung health in a number of different ways. Some of those ways involve finding clean air spaces and developing clean air spaces in their homes, and using air filtration devices. And we have some important research to help better understand the air quality and health benefits of air filtration devices. We also, as many of you know, we certify air cleaning devices that can be purchased and used in people's homes or in any kind of setting. And we have regulations that protect people by banning devices that produce levels of ozone that are considered harmful to human health. And but there are some questions that have been raised around some types of devices, particularly electronic air cleaning devices. And there have been some studies that have looked at some of the emissions, other types of emissions, not ozone, but other types of emissions from electronic air cleaning devices. And so we're looking at a white paper to look a little more into some of those studies and decide if there's some additional work that ARB needs to do to better understand those effects and to see if there are some health concerns that we need to be aware of. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. And we do have a number of staff also in this webinar, in this workshop that can help answer questions. Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you, Bonnie. I see a raised hand from Jesse Marquez. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you again for this opportunity. And I do support, the first proposal in regards to a quantified health study. The problems I have learned and discovered in the course of looking at public health studies is that normally there's 2 things that they do which upset us. They either pre-select certain chemicals, 2 or 3, for example, versus you might be exposed to 10, 15 different ones. So therefore, when you come out with your conclusions and your findings, it's always restricted to those particular chemicals. So we don't get a comprehensive picture of what you were actually exposed to. The other problem we have is that when they do the surveys, they also need to be focused because we do have different types of categories. We have communities that are fence line. And they could be fence line to a port, for example. We have communities that could be fence line to a transportation corridor, which could be a truck or a train or a combination. We have communities that are fence line to agricultural pesticide exposure. And then we have those that are exposed to warehouse and distribution communities. So if we're going to be doing studies, then we need to make sure that we select, at least these 4 or 5 categories, because those are the predominant ones that we are concerned with. The other thing of the value of information on the survey are the questions. I see where you put down learning disabilities and diabetes. Well, those are just a matter of what you include in the public health survey. Our organization about 10 years ago got brave and decided we would do a public health survey. And we started developing the survey to keep it simple, but then the keep it simple became a lot longer. Instead of 10, 15 questions, it was up to like 40 questions with ABCDs. And then what we always hear all the time are people saying, well, wait a minute, people are not going to spend a lot of time answering these surveys. Well, when it boiled down to, and we did our good public relations, we sent flyers in English and Spanish like a week ahead of time that yes, we were going to go door to door. And if we missed you, we're going to come back 2 more times. And then if we came and we missed you, we left another flyer in English, Spanish saying, you could also make an appointment. But the whole key thing was, yes, it did take 15, 20 minutes to do it, but we got over 600 Wilmington Carson residents willing to do it. So I don't want anyone saying that, it's not good, it can't be done. It can be done. And yes, you can have a lot of questions such as diabetes, learning disabilities, lupus, everything else, but you must include them in the health questionnaire. And that's where you need to have EJ participation in the development of any of these programs, tests, or surveys or studies. Thank you.
Thank you. Bonnie, do you have a response?
Yeah, those are really excellent comments. Thank you, Jesse. Very, very good comments. And I would just say that we are trying to address all of those. We always can do more, but we are trying to address all of those in terms of picking 2 or 3 pollutants. you're right that when we develop a proposal, we have to identify the specific pollutants that we're looking at. The researchers have to identify them. But we have asked, and we do have built into several proposals, that we're asking to the extent possible to look not only at the individual pollutants, I'm thinking of 2 specific projects in my mind, but also where they can to look at the data on the impacts of the combinations of pollutants. So we are asking for that information. And in fact, we have a current ongoing research project. It's hard to talk about all of them in this space, but that's particularly aimed at communities in the Los Angeles region near freight corridors. So I think that gets to a couple of your questions, and looking at asthma and respiratory outcomes, including emergency department visits for asthma in those communities, and trying to quantify that respiratory effect from pollution. So we are trying to, let's get into your second question. We are trying to look at communities that are particularly vulnerable and that have these kinds of near source impacts, and better understand and quantify those effects so that we can use those in our regulatory analyses. And we have some community engagement in that research that's we're working with RAMP to help with that community engagement. In terms of EJ and health participation that you're talking about, just excellent comments. We are everywhere we can. We are looking for ways to include community perspectives and participation in our health research. Sometimes that's through sub grants to community organizations to be involved in providing advice and input on the projects. And sometimes it's going to be involved through meetings and community engagement, just to share about the projects, to provide more transparency about what we're doing and what the goals are, and trying to get input. So anyway, thank you for those comments. I hope that helps answer some of your questions.
Well, just like Miss Margaret was mentioning, we are the victims of all these circumstances. Last September, Sunday night, I was rushed at 8:30 p.m. to emergency treatment for an acute asthma attack. Now, I was controlled, but remember, we had 100 forest fires going on, and so that weakened my system. And then we had a governor issue an executive order waiving ships from plugging into electric shore power because he was concerned about the rolling blackouts. And now we had like 60, 70 ships in the port of LA now not under control, not plugged in, not using anything, and that caused me to get sick. And that's where a health impact assessment comes into the picture, and a public health survey comes into the picture. So you must look at all these other circumstances. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good comments.
We only have a couple minutes left on this topic. I'll allow 2 more comments, and then we'll move on to environmental justice. So I have Steve Rosenblum and then Debbie Bennett. So Steve, you've got 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's a very good program you're talking about. I just want to point out that as part of its rulemaking, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District recently had a report from its technical advisory panel dealing with PM 2.5. And their main conclusion was that there's no lower limit medically established for PM 2.5. So the present EPA limit of 8 micrograms per cubic meter is probably way too high. Is there any intent in this proposal to look specifically at the health effects of PM 2.5 with hope that a rule of CARB could be promulgated that would reduce the maximum allowable concentration in ambient air? Thank you.
Well, I would just comment that a couple of comments. One is that what we're doing in a number of these proposals is to isolate the what the epidemiological evidence shows us in terms of the health effects that are experienced per increment of increase in PM 2.5 exposure. And, we're not, I think that increase could be above the standard. I think it could be below the standard. I have to, just double check that, but, we're trying to follow the epidemiological studies. And we're developing our own epidemiological studies looking at California data. So we're in part following those studies that are currently used at the federal level. And by doing these research studies, we're developing our own quantified health effects estimates that we'll be using in our research. I did want to comment that we have, as part of our health branch, we have contributed to comments by the agency calling for a stronger, more health protective particle pollution standard at the federal level. So I was going to answer it in two ways. That, we're looking at all these health effects. We're looking at the evidence and what that shows us about the incremental effects of exposure. But we also have supported and continue to support, along with a number of other states and other organizations and groups, the strengthening of our federal PM 2.5 standards.
Okay, one last comment from Debbie Bennett. You have 3 minutes, and then we'll move on to environmental justice.
Yeah, hopefully mine's quick. On the title here written for the second one, it looks like it's both exposure and epidemiology, but in your description, it sounded like you were sort of stopping at exposure from the impact of natural gas appliances in commercial buildings. And I just wanted to say, I think that one is a great idea, and I think it is going to be a lot more straightforward to conduct if it does indeed stop just at the exposure level, because the exposures are going to be so varied that in and of itself is going to be a really interesting research area.
Well, that is a really helpful comment, because we've been looking at that very hard and trying to figure out the most that we can do to better understand those health effects. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it'll just be really hard to tease out health effects, especially when the people are only exposed for a limited amount of time. But I think using those exposures and then looking at the existing data on the health effects from those would be a really good way to go on that one. So.
Okay, thanks. And we do, as you know, we have a lot of research, as you know, on that's connecting appliance use, particularly cooking appliances in homes to effects. So we have a lot of those kinds of long edge.
Right.
Your work has shown, yes, a lot of that important research that we can draw on. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Okay, we're on our final slide, and Bonnie is also going to be presenting on this one.
Right. Thank you so much, Sonia. We do prioritize environmental justice at CARB. We have considered achieving environmental justice to be a key agency-wide priority over many years, and we have sponsored research to better understand air pollution disparities in communities. For example, we had important research looking at disparities near key freight corridors, and we have sponsored studies to better understand key sources of pollution affecting communities, including pollution near our southern border. Currently, we are finalizing, not finalizing a project, we're finalizing a contract to start a very important project to better track health outcomes in under-resourced communities. And these outcomes could include respiratory, cardiovascular, and other outcomes. We will be tracking, our contractors will be tracking indicators affecting a number of communities. We're not sure exactly how many at this point. And we'll be working to set up a website that can track these health indicators in communities so we can better track over time, track health conditions in communities over time. This has long been a topic of discussion, I believe, around AB 617 and a request that there be more health tracking in communities. So I just wanted to mention that as context. And going forward, we have 3 types of research that we've listed here to add to our understanding of environmental justice and our understanding of vulnerable community impacts. The first proposal is a very novel idea that we're very, very interested in. And we hope to track exposures and emissions of multiple generations of families in under-resourced communities and other communities, and to look at those the data on those exposures, pollution exposures, and over time, and so that we can compare exposures of multiple generations and look at the trends, and if families of multiple generations are experiencing similar or increased, or what is the trend in the exposures, and to understand if those trends persist over time, and what the difference is. We want to disaggregate results by race and ethnicity and better understand the differences in exposures among different communities. So we feel this is a very novel and an important way to better understand the vulnerabilities and the disparities that communities have been dealing with over time, and that will add a lot to inform our policies going forward. We're also very interested in a number of projects to better understand toxic emissions and exposures. So the project we have listed here would help us to look at what's called fugitive toxic emissions, and the source would be metal processing facilities, and look at how we can better monitor, understand the exposures to those toxic emissions that aren't routinely measured, and how we can better address some of these gaps in monitoring. And then the other project is, there's still some details to be decided, but the important model of research here would be a collaborative research project between CARB and a community, an under-resourced community, where there's a joint look at the needs in that community, the air quality and health needs, and developing through collaboration, developing a research agenda to move forward and try to address and prioritize the needs in that community. So I will leave it there, and we're looking forward again to your comments and ideas.
Thank you, Bonnie. So I see some hands. I see Sarah Aird first. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much, first of all, for the presentations today. I did want to express that I have some concerns with the process, and also wanted to talk about the issue that we feel like keeps getting ignored. So I work with, I'm a co-director of the statewide coalition called Californians for Pesticide Reform. We're a statewide coalition of more than 200 organizations around the state, and we work directly with low-income communities of color on the front lines of pesticide exposure who are disproportionately impacted. And we've been raising the need for CARB to look at pesticides since 2017 with, as far as I can tell, like no change. We submitted pesticide-related research proposals as part of the triennial research process in 2020, and again submitted research suggestions this year. And I haven't seen, even as rejected, I haven't seen any of our proposals even rejected here. So I'm confused about the process, and I'm guessing that I'm not the only person that has questions just around the process. But specifically to pesticides, during the presentation, it was flagged that environmental justice is a high priority consideration for this research work, and very much appreciate that. And want to flag that Cal EPA researchers have actually identified pesticides as the pollutants with the greatest racial and income disparities in the state. And they contribute to really critical health impacts, including cancer, birth defects, ADHD, autism, Parkinson's, and asthma, among other health conditions. In addition to the fact that this is a really important environmental justice issue and health issue, It's also extremely relevant right now with CARB working on the scoping plan. And again, another area that pesticides have currently been ignored, the impact that they're having on climate change and on increased greenhouse gas emissions. So our most recent research requests were actually that CARB consider looking into funding a life cycle analysis of pesticides and their impact on greenhouse gas emissions. Many pesticides are actually petrochemicals themselves. They produce greenhouse gases as part of the production, transportation, and then as part of their use, there's documentation and research that particular fumigants that are heavily used in California actually increase the greenhouse gas nitrous oxide 700 to 800% higher than normal levels. In addition, they're VOCs and contribute to smog and also to the development of tropospheric ozone, which the IPCC identified as the third most significant greenhouse gas globally. So we feel that these issues are really important, and it's very unclear from the presentation what is happening, and also from any kind of response from CARB when we do submit
20
suggestions.
seconds.
So would love to please put in a request. Number one, we would like CARB to look at this issue. And number two, would like to see a process that's more transparent and clear on why proposals aren't accepted or what the objections are to those. But really appreciate your time. And my final comment is would love to get the slides in advance of these meetings because the slides are very helpful, but it's hard to process during the presentations. Thank you.
Appreciate that. And we're also happy to follow up. I know we only have a few more minutes left in the meeting, so happy to follow up also offline. I would like to, we did have the concept solicitation for the projects for this year back in, and somebody can help me remember the exact date, but it was earlier this year in terms of the concept solicitations that fed into this process. And we did receive a pesticide comment, and I believe in the beginning of the slides we listed out all of the comments and concepts we got in, and did list that out, as well as then the considerations on how we narrowed down both what we received in externally and internally as concepts, some of the considerations on that we put forward to the solicited comments to kind of narrow it down to where we are today. But that was in the initial slides, and maybe Sonia could confirm that.
Yes, I presented it as part of the summary of concepts and comments that we received in the process that you just spoke about.
And I'll just I did see that, I did note that, but looking at the key considerations for the projects, our proposals actually fit most of those considerations. So again, there's a lack of clarity around why our proposals around pesticides keep getting rejected.
And we're happy to meet with you, just realizing what time it is to discuss it in more detail, and knowing that there are a few people with their hands up as well.
We would really appreciate that, and would love to work with CARB staff on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I have Steve Rosenblum. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks again for the chance to speak. As part of this process that I was referring to earlier about the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, they approved a new regulation on PM 2.5 emissions and PM 10 emissions from refineries. As part of that, the work that they did to promulgate the rule, they used modeling to describe the PM 2.5 distribution from the refineries on the local communities, and particularly in Richmond and in the Richmond, California area. And the reason they had to use modeling is because there's no data available on the local distributions of PM 2.5. And that's because there are no approved small monitors for use in a house, or even monitors that can be hand carried. And the monitors that are approved by CARB and the Air District cost $15,000 each and are not available to a normal human being. So I think as part of this EJ research, CARB needs to make a big effort to provide handheld or even small affordable monitors, and even a program to buy monitors for people with low income so that they can put one in their house or near their house, and they can determine what their exposure is exactly, rather than based on a model or some guess on some number measured by a unit that's 5 miles away from where they live. So please, if someone could say something about that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bonnie or Elizabeth?
Well, I appreciate that suggestion. I agree, it is important to expand monitoring. I would just note that we do have some research proposals where we are providing some monitors. For example, we have a project that will be looking will soon be looking at air filtration devices and looking at air quality and health benefits from air filtration devices in schools in the Southern California area, where we will be providing low-cost monitors to the schools. So we are incorporating some of that into our work, but I agree we could do more.
I just wanted to mention another place to look would be the community air grants. In that process, we can provide a link in the chat.
Yeah.
I see Jesse Marquez, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, well, congratulations. Those are 3 great proposals. And number 1, I really love it, but we're still having a problem, Houston. And the problem is, and I'm going to give you an example, Port of LA, Port of Long Beach announced that every public opportunity to every elected official, to every agency, there's been a 60 to 70% reduction in PM, which has been true based on PM 2.5. So if there has been a 60 to 70% decrease, then there should be a significant increase in public health, in respiratory diseases. And therein lies the problem. I have not seen any studies that show there's been an equivalent significant improvement in public health as a result of the claimed reductions. And the reason there is a problem, point blank, is because it's based on 2.5. The reason we still have high respiratory health problems is because exposure to ultrafine. What you need to do a research study on is to approve in California a standard for ultrafine 1.0 and smaller. Because yes, that first PM 2.0 study will come out with some good data, but it'll still miss the fact that there is significant or more significant exposure to the ultrafine 1.0. So if you're going to do a study, let's start it from 1.0. Let us not do a half-ass study that's going to be challenged and not be an accurate, complete assessment. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. And I also, it might be helpful to mention a project that we're just kicking off on community health metrics, trying to look at what can we look at on how health is changing over time as well. So we have a project that's about to start off on that was approved last year.
Yes, and we're very excited about that project, and we'll be getting out more information on that project, and that will involve a significant amount of community engagement to choose the health outcomes of most concern to the community that will be included on the list to be tracked. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Are there any final questions before we end the meeting? If not, I just want to remind everyone that you can submit further written comments to our research email, and we will be posting the slides and the recordings as soon as possible. And I want to remind everyone that any written comments are due by October 1st. We want to thank you all for your attention. And Elizabeth, I don't know if you had any closing remarks.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for all the great comments. This has been very useful discussion to help us not only think about the projects we're putting forward this year. I think there's a lot of comments that have come in that we can consider for next year's funding cycle as well, given where we are in the process. And I really appreciate that discussion. Want to make sure that we move forward with the information taken in for the projects this year and hold on to some of that information for projects for next year as well. And hope that folks continue to be engaged and in the research process, and definitely get us comments by October 1st for this funding cycle.
Thank you. We will end the meeting here. Thank you so much for your attention and your comments and your input. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.